Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to introduce you to LogicPrep's College Talks. I am Carrie Hanrahan, the Director of College Advising here at LogicPrep, and I am here with Alex and Micah, who will introduce themselves in a second. And we are together going to answer some questions that you previously submitted on how to craft your best early decision strategy. We're going to do everything from like, what is early decision, to like, how do you craft your best strategy, to how do I even navigate this? So we'll talk through all of that, and feel free throughout this conversation to ask any questions in the question and answer section, and I will be moderating this throughout. All right, so again, I'm Carrie, the Director of College Advising. I'm so excited to be here. My previous admission experience is at Colorado College in the Office of Admission, and I currently also work at UCLA reading medical school applications, and I am going to pass it over to Micah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Micahs Story. I'm one of the college advisors. I've been working in higher education admissions for just over 15 years now. I started working for Vassar College in upstate New York. Then I was at Emerson College in Boston. And for the past 5 years, I have been in charge of admissions and student affairs for the hospitality school at Boston University. And very happy to be here and chat with all of you tonight. And I'll pass it off to Alex now.
Thank you, Micah. Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where in the world you are. So excited to have so many folks from so many different places joining us. My name is Alex Halliday. I am a former admissions officer from the University of Chicago, where I worked and attended for several years. As a student, I was a tour guide and student interviewer, and then I read applications after graduating and spent a couple of years reading undergrad there for mostly the Midwest and independent schools, some international schools around the country and around the world. So that's a little bit about me, and I will pass it back to Carrie.
All right, so I'm going to start off with the first and one of the most common questions that we get. The question is, what is early decision and how does it work? So just to start there, I want to explain a couple different deadlines that schools have, like ways you can apply to college. So the first way, as we're talking about, is early decision, which is what we're discussing today. And early decision means that if you apply to, let's say, Colorado College, early decision, and you are accepted early decision, then your application is done. You are accepted to college, you are going to Colorado College, you rescind the rest of your applications from every other school that you've applied to, potentially early action, and you're done with the whole college application process. Congratulations, early decision, you got in, you do have to go if you get accepted. The next piece is early action. And so if you apply to a college early action, some colleges have this, some don't. It just means that you're applying generally by the same deadline, which is usually November 1st or November 15th, same as the early decision deadline, but you're not required to attend if you get accepted early action. So early decision, if you get accepted, you do have to go. That's the decision you made. You've decided to apply early. You've decided to go if you get accepted. Second piece, early action, is you're just acting early. You're not sure yet. You want to submit your application a little bit earlier by November 15th, get that extra bump to help you get a look in the admission office. But if you get accepted, you don't have to go. The next one I want to also discuss is restrictive early action, which is a little bit more complicated. Kind of like a combo of these. And there's a couple schools that are very well known for their restrictive early action. One of them is Georgetown, for example. Let's say you apply to Georgetown restrictive early action. It means you are applying early and you actually are restricted in only applying to Georgetown. You cannot apply to any other school if you apply restrictive early action to Georgetown. So you have to wait until you hear back from Georgetown to then make a decision. Do I want to go to Georgetown or do I want to apply to other colleges? So you are restricted when you apply, but you are not required to go if you get it. And then the last one I'm going to talk about today is regular decision. So regular decision is kind of the opposite of early decision. It does not give you any benefit when you apply regular decision. You generally apply in January or by February 1st, depending on the college, and you hear back a couple months later and you don't have any benefit of applying. So you just apply regular decision, maybe you'll get in, maybe not, we're not sure. But that is essentially the breakdown of what are the different ways to apply to college. So early decision, you've decided early, you got to go if you get in. Early action, you are acting early, you don't have to go if you get in. Restrictive early action, you are restricted from applying to any other school if you apply to that school early. And then last one is regular. That's just like applying regular, no benefit. All right. And then the next question that I want to address as part of this is like, why early decision, and like what percentage of students are selected by early decision? So early decision is important because it gives you the best possible chance of getting into that college. So if you apply early decision to a school, then that school knows you are so excited, you really want to go. And if you get accepted, then they know you're coming. So they feel like they're probably a little bit more excited about you, just like you're a little bit more excited about them. So you get an extra percentage bump generally of acceptances if you apply early decision to a college. So that's why it's really important. The acceptance percentage differs by pool, and by school, but generally most schools have quite a significant increase in students who are accepted early decision than they do students who are accepted either early action or regular decision. And the application is the same when you apply early decision. There's very little different. All you have to do is sign a contract that says, if I get into this college, I'm definitely going to this college. So make sure that you do sign that contract, and also that your high school counselor signs that contract, because they will need to do that, as well as one of your parents, which means your parents also have to discuss this with you, and you all have to be on the same page. All right, I think I'm going to pass this off to Alex next. So the next question that I want to discuss is, Alex, how should I choose the college that I will apply for early decision? And what should I worry about or think about when I'm choosing colleges for early decision?
Yeah, it's a great question, Carrie, and one that a lot of students are going to grapple with as they're going through this process, right? Not every school offers early decision. Some schools do, some schools don't. But if a school that you really love offers early decision, and it's a school that you have a good shot at, I always encourage students to think about it if that's within the realm of possibility for them. And when I say within the realm of possibility, there are a couple of factors to consider with early decision, including if you're applying for financial aid, and financial consideration is something that you are thinking about as you're entering this process. Early decision might seem like a really big commitment before you're ready to say, I'm fully ready to pay for college right now. And I know exactly that no matter what they offer me, I'm going to make that work. But if you're a student who's a little less worried about that, or think that you can make it work, but you really love that school and you're really excited about it, and with the help of some college advisors, like they've been able to tell you whether or not this is a realistic school for you, then I always encourage students to think about the early decision option. Why not lock in a school that you're really excited about? I tell a lot of my students that it's kind of like, they don't know this yet, but parents, you'll understand this a little bit more. It's kind of like getting engaged, right? You're not going to propose to just anyone you've met after a couple times and you're like, hey, I think this might work. We have some of the same interests. They have some of the majors I like, right? But a school that you say, wow, I know that's the school for me because they have the research that I want to do, and they have the professors that I'm really excited, and it's not cold in the winter if that's something you're after, right? If it really seems like that perfect school for you, like go ahead and tell them that that's what it is, right? That early decision commitment is offering them the ring, and if they take it, it's done, right? That marriage is happening and you're really excited about it. So just think of it that way, parents, as you're going through this process. If you all have gotten that ring before and like been through that process yourselves, that's really what your students are going through in terms of making a serious commitment to a school in the next couple of years.
All right, thank you so much, Alex. I also want to mention one more thing that we were chatting about recently. There is a piece of this puzzle that is a little bit different for those who are applying for financial aid. And I just want to mention that up front. And so if you are applying for financial aid, I generally recommend that you look at schools that they have guaranteed that they will meet full financial need. for you. And so you can always fill out something called the net price calculator, the financial aid calculator, on each school's website, and you can determine how much money you might get from that school if you apply for financial aid. And after that happens, if you feel confident in that amount of money that you might get, then it is probably okay to apply early decision. But I just want to make sure that you feel financially comfortable in that decision. So thank you.
Thanks for adding that, Carrie. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so our next question, Micah, this one is for you. So Micah, what factors indicate and help you decide whether to apply early for a specific school?
Yeah, it's a big question. And while we recommend early decision to everybody because it's the best thing you can do to increase your chances, in a specific school, it doesn't mean that you have to. And a lot of students don't. A lot of students will apply regular decision. So no matter what, the first thing you have to do is come up with a bigger list of colleges, because even if you are applying early decision, there's still no guarantee that you're going to get in. And so you don't want to be in December, 3 weeks from the application deadlines, because most regular decision schools will have January deadlines, and suddenly then have to start writing other applications. So you're going to develop a full list. And in an ideal world, that's around 10 to 12 schools. And within that list, hopefully then you narrow it down to the number one school, the school that you decide, this is the one I want to be the most happy at, or I will be the most happy at. And when I work with students to kind of develop their list, sort of the big factors you want to think about are, first, size and location. And what I mean by that is, do you want a really big school? Do you want a small college? Do you want to be in or near a city? Or do you like the idea of sort of a self-contained campus that's kind of out, in a much more rural area where it's much more self-contained and you're going to spend almost all your time there on the campus? And that's really going to help you narrow down a lot of different types of schools. Being able to visit in person really helps, which is obviously something that the last 2 years, no one's really been able to do. But if you get a chance to go to colleges, that'll really help you get a sense for what they are. And once you get past size and location, the other really big thing is academics and culture. Academics is, what are the classes like? And this is something where as a student, you have to think, what's your learning style? What do you like about your school that you're in right now? Do you want to be somewhere with small classes where you're going to be actively participating a lot? Do you like the idea of maybe being in bigger lectures where you can just kind of sit there and listen? That will really help determine what type of school you potentially might want to look at. I always recommend everybody, when you visit a school as well, just look at the faces of the students as you walk around and just see if people seem happy when they come out of buildings, because that can really help you kind of determine a lot about what it's like to be a student there. So within those 10 to 12 schools, what we always recommend is you want a mix of what we call kind of target, reach, and likely schools. So a likely school is a school that you have a very likely chance to be admitted to. A target school is kind of somewhere in the middle. We think that this is somewhere you ideally do have a strong chance of getting into. It might be a more selective school, so there is a chance that you might not get accepted. And then a reach school would be a highly selective school. So a school taking 20% of applicants. That we call those a reach because you kind of are reaching for it. The most important thing I tell for every student with a reach school as well, or with any of those highly selective schools, most of the students that don't get accepted, it's through no fault of their own. It's simply because those schools get so many applications that they don't have enough room for all the students they do want to admit. When the first school I worked at, we received 8,000 applications for 660 spots in the freshman class. So that's why if you don't get into those schools, it's really not your fault. It's what I always want students to understand. But you want that well-balanced list. You can have those reach schools, ideally the target schools in the middle, and those likelies. Now, once you have that, if there's one of those schools that seems a lot more appealing, like if you're looking at all of these and maybe you visited them and there was one that really stood out and you thought, I can really see myself there, that's the school you apply early decision to.
Thanks, Micah. I really appreciate it. One of my, when I used to work in admission, one of the things that I remember thinking was very complicated to understand, even when I was working there, was sometimes we really wanted to accept, I don't know, every single student from the state of New Jersey, right? Like they're the best students. We love, also I'm from New Jersey, so sure, of course they're the best. Amazing students from the state of New Jersey. We want to accept all 100 students that applied, but we have to diversify our class. We need students from every state. We need students who have every different type of thought. We need students from every financial background. And so we couldn't necessarily just accept 100 students from New Jersey. We would have to have picked maybe 10. And so I just want you to think about that. And as Micah says, these factors that are outside of your control, sometimes those factors are even almost unthinkable. It's very difficult to understand what each school needs in a student body. So thanks, just wanted to reiterate that. All right, next one, Alex, this one is for you. So I do want to mention to everyone on this call, this is the single most asked question that we've gotten so far as people registered. So Alex Halliday, tell me, what makes an applicant stand out the most in the early decision pool? And what do admission officers look for?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of answers to this. There are so many cool parts of the application, and Carrie will talk a little bit about that in our next question, but you know, an amazing essay, a great extracurricular list, right? These are all things that could make a student stand out. But I think generally when a student is standing out, it's because they have a cohesive story, like a cohesive thread throughout their application. You know, there are students who, you know, for instance, one of my students that I worked with really loves STEM, right? And she loves the sciences, she loves engineering, she loves mathematics, right? But she also really loves working with kids. And so what was interesting was that she was doing all this volunteer work with younger students, and it culminated in this project that she actually started a STEM curriculum for students at this local program, right? And it made sense with her application. Her essay was about her own experience with engineering, right? And how she got interested. And then we saw all of this about how she's sharing that. It created this whole arc throughout her application that continued to repeat to a reader to say, she is really clearly interested and passionate about STEM and sharing it with others, and has this vision for herself of how she sees that going. And even if she didn't have the vision for herself of how she saw that going, we saw that vision. We could see where it would go because that whole application made sense together. You know, and so I always encourage students to take a step back, look at how all of your pieces are fitting together. Are you telling one piece in the essay and then a totally different piece through your extracurriculars, and they're not connected? Right? That's part of our job as college advisors as LogicPrep, to work with you all as our students to help create this narrative and to string that together. But I also think, especially in the early decision round, schools want to know why them. Why are you so excited, and why are you so committed that you're ready to say, this is where I want to go, and I'll withdraw all my other applications if I get in? And so a really good, why do I want to go to UChicago essay? Why do I want to go to Northwestern essay, right? Like whatever the school may be, can make a really big difference in a student's application, and helps us see that you've done the work to see yourself there, that this isn't just a school you plucked off a list and decided to apply to, that you put the thought, energy to see yourself at that school and to show us that same vision. And so I think those are probably the two things that are really, really would stand out in most readers.
Thanks, Alex. Mike, I see you nodding. Is there anything you want to add?
No, I very much agree, especially on the why you want to apply there. And just one of the key things, because I remember reading a lot of these, is you want to try to connect your reasonings to kind of the culture or the spirit of the school you're applying to. And what you don't want to do is just list a bunch of buildings. Because I remember sometimes reading well, I really liked the campus and I want to take this class in this building, and I think I would do well living in this dorm. And all that to me would mean is, okay, so you read the website or you looked at a map of campus. You really want to try to go a little bit deeper in connecting sort of your interests and where you want to go in your life and your career to what that particular school offers.
Thanks, Micah. I also would recommend, I think we were talking earlier, you know, what makes a good applicant, things along those lines. I think something this year that's very difficult that we mentioned earlier is it's really hard to visit colleges. Like that is immensely difficult and relatively unsafe depending on where you are and what the college allows and what your country allows. And so I think that it would be very helpful if you put some time and effort into going on the virtual tours, signing up for the information sessions, the live information sessions. There's colleges also now that they really track demonstrated interest, even in this virtual world. And so when Alex was talking about what makes a really standout applicant, there's some colleges that will actually check if you registered for one of their like student conversations that you can have virtually. And did you actually go to that student conversation? So they might track both of those. And I think that that's not only really valuable for the college tracking your interest, but for your investment in the school and you understanding if you love it enough to apply early decision. Micah, Alex, do you agree? Awesome. All right. Next. So the next question that we had quite a number of, I am going to walk through them structurally, which is, what are the parts of a college application? I know some of you know this, so we've got some seniors on this call, some parents on this call, some people with older siblings, but I do want to run through this just to make sure we all get it. And the next question is, how long does it take to fill out? So I think first, it's very hard to assume that it's going to take a certain amount of time to fill out a college application. However, I would say it generally takes longer than you'd expect. That's usually my go-to advice, is start earlier than you think. And if you haven't started yet and you're a senior, just jump on it soon and you'll be able to get it done. So the first part of the college application is usually the main common application, or what I call the basic application. So you fill out one main application, the common application potentially, before you apply to a specific school. So you have to fill out this main application. There's also specific applications, these main applications for University of California schools or University of Texas schools. But the most common one is called the common application. And I think it has now over 900 colleges on it. And so that's usually the one that you're going to fill out first. That will include like your demographic, background information, your parent information, education. It's like all that kind of boring stuff that's really actually quite important. So that's in that main application. As part of that, you're going to have a personal statement. And Alex talked earlier about like really rocking that personal statement and making sure you have an excellent narrative that I think is really rooted and grounded in your personal statement. So the rest of that application is going to have that thread throughout. But what's the story you want to tell? What is your narrative? That's going to come from that personal statement. Next, testing. Standardized tests are still a part of the college application process. And I think this is a question we get asked a lot. Should I submit standardized test scores? It's going to be different for each school and each student. However, if you have the ability to do test prep and work really hard on your standardized test scores, we suggest it. Standardized test scores are still a part of the application process at the majority of schools. And so I would highly think about engaging in that and seeing if you can stand out by getting those high scores. And then that's that kind of that main part. It also includes activities. And so we want to make sure we know what your leadership was in school, what clubs you were part of. This is kind of like a resume, which you can also upload if you want. But really the activities list, it continues that thread that you've talked about in your personal statement. We want to understand more about you and what are all the things that maybe we don't see in your transcript or something else. So we do have that activities list or resume that we like you to talk about. And then of course we have the transcripts. So the counselor recommendation that they submit will include a set of your transcripts. It will include the school profile, which means what is your high school? Like, what does your high school offer? What are the AP classes that they offer? What are the IB classes that they offer? Colleges need to know where you sit in the pool of applicants from your school. And also they need to know where you sit in your school. And so the counselor will submit all of this information, the school profile, which talks about your school, the counselor recommendation. So we really highly recommend you have a good relationship with your counselor. And if you don't know your counselor, go schedule a meeting with them because it's going to really, really help. Talk to them about your college list, all that stuff. And then your counselor will also submit your transcripts, which are obviously your grades, GPA, things like that. The next pieces are teacher recommendations. We generally recommend at least thinking about 2 teacher recommendations. And I I think the data behind this is a little different for each school, but I think it's helpful to have a teacher that you've known for longer than a year, potentially a teacher that you've taken either more than one class in, or a teacher that you worked with junior year, and that you've maybe gone in for some extra help with or done an extra project with. That teacher is going to be able to speak about you in a more full capacity. Also, for those who are applying for financial aid, that's a piece of this puzzle. Please make sure you apply. And then if you're an international student, then we also recommend, it's actually fairly required, that you take the TOEFL. You also need to submit like bank statements, which is called a certificate of finance. And sometimes you'll need a translated transcript. And so you can always talk to your counselor at school or someone at LogicPrep to make sure that you know how to get that transcript translated specifically, so that colleges will accept it. And then after that main application, which is all of that stuff, then we have a supplemental application for most colleges. So let's say you're applying for, Alex talked about UChicago earlier. Let's say you're applying for UChicago. There is a supplemental application that you have to fill out additional information, additional essays, and generally that like, why do I want to go to this college application? And so that will take another set of time. And so that's where I say, make sure that you've researched the school, that you've gone to those info sessions, you've signed up for those events online or however it is, so that you can answer those questions in full. All right, so that being said, it takes longer than you think. That's probably the reality. And also once the school year starts, which some of your school years have already started, things just get a little tougher. Like you're concentrated on your classes, your APs, your IBs, or your classes, or your clubs, or your sports, and everything gets just like a little bit tougher to navigate. And so it's really helpful to maintain a structure, set guidelines, have a checklist. And I think you're going to do great. So those are the parts of the application, and thank you. I know that took a little bit of time, but I hope that was really helpful. Micah, Alex, anything that I missed that you want to add?
You know, I would just add for the timing, for students, think of it as taking another class.
Yeah.
Like, think of your college application as like an elective course you're taking senior year of high school.
Like, I've never thought of it that way. Thank you.
Yeah, which means
it's like taking an elective that's like required, required elective.
But the difference is when you take an elective, this time is already set aside for you. I encourage every student I work with, especially as we enter the school year, to set aside 1 to 2 hours a week that's dedicated to working on all the things that you need to do for your college process. It likely will take you more as you near the deadline, but at least having that time set aside every week, you know that it's sacred. It's not going to be touched, right? Like nothing is going to get in the way of your 2 hours spent on your college application. It's important to find the time.
Thanks, Micah. Thanks, Alex. I really liked that analogy. I appreciate that. So Micah, this is the last more specific question I would say, and then I'll answer a little more general one. Micah, what happens if I don't have a favorite school? What do I do?
It's totally okay. And a lot of students don't. That's the most important thing. It's a common misconception that everybody's going to have sort of a number one school. That for me, when I work with students, I have kind of two most important principles that I tell students at the beginning of our very first meeting. And the first thing is there's 4,000 colleges in the US. You will probably be happy at half of them. And the second thing is when you start to look at schools and you go through this process, probably the most important thing is don't fall in love. And what I mean by that is don't fixate on one school. And going back to that, there are 4,000 colleges out there. Don't tell yourself or think, if I don't get into University of Chicago, talked about that one already tonight. If I don't get in there, I'm not going to be happy at any other school, because you're going to be happy at a lot of different schools. And the other piece of it too is nothing is forever. 30% of college students in the US do not graduate from the school they started at as freshmen. So even if you do end up picking a school, you think it's your number one, you think it's going to be great, you get there and you're disappointed, that's okay too. You have this whole process can essentially get repeated again. Any college in the US you can go to once you've already started, they call it transferring. You can apply as a transfer student. And it's just a similar process to applying as a freshman. You'll just basically submit a different application with slightly different deadlines. and you'll submit a transcript for both high school and whatever work you've completed in college. So I hope that that can take a little bit of the stress off of this whole process. I know this might seem like this is going to be the biggest decision you ever make in your life. And while it is important, it is going to be a big decision, you know, it's okay. And you're going to have options.
I just want to say, Micah, that was awesome. And I really appreciate that answer, to think about, you know, especially in this time of COVID, where it's getting really challenging for students to visit campus. Can be really scary to pick a school and to commit to that school, and to think that I've picked a school and I'm stuck there, that I've made an agreement and I will graduate from there and this is it. So I really appreciate you mentioning that there is an opportunity to transfer, and thinking a little bit about, yeah, it's okay if that happens. Lots of students do it, and to give yourself that flexibility, especially in this year where we are more limited in what our ability is to actually go to the place that we think is going to be home for the next 4 years. It's okay to say, okay, this might not be it, but it's okay to transfer too.
Thanks, Micah, and thanks, Alex. And one more thing to add on to that piece is I was chatting with a set of students earlier today about this, actually, just to explain for our students who, especially our international students, something that we're noticing is, because we can't really visit schools this year, because it's so complicated, we're seeing in the early decision strategy, we're kind of seeing one of two things. One, we're either seeing nobody wants to apply early decision. They're very nervous. They're nervous to commit, which we really understand. We get it. It doesn't change the application and admission landscape, but we understand why potentially a lot of people don't want to apply early decision. And also, that's okay. You just have to understand the outcome and the realities of if we don't choose an early decision school. So that's the first thing that's happening. I think the second thing is, because no one's visited, because you haven't been able to see campuses and really learn what you like about a school, not fall in love, don't worry, Micah, but really learn what you like about a school, and also learn what the flaws are in that school. Because you can't figure that out, what we're seeing is many of our students are going for what we call the classic choices. They're kind of defaulting to the name brand schools, the Ivies, the ones that their friends have gone to in the past, things along those lines. And I think it's really helpful, and I'm curious to hear Micah and Alex's thoughts about this, for us to remind you that something that you've heard someone went to in the past might not be the best school for you. And that's also totally okay. And so if you do have a friend or a family member or something that really fell in love with school and they had an amazing time, we really just suggest you do more research into it before deciding this is also the early decision school for me. We want you to be happy, and we want you to fall in love, and we want you to maybe not fall in love. Sorry, Micah, but we want you to have a really good experience at this school, and make sure you understand the school before you're applying early decision. So Micah, Alex, anything to add there?
I could say it's more the name of the school or kind of how well known it is. You really need to think about the culture and academics, because you're going to spend 4 years of your life at this place, and you want to make sure you're really going to love it. This is obviously something that's not happening now because of COVID, but for younger students, I did want to offer that when you can travel again, a lot of schools run overnight programs where you can actually have the opportunity. They'll usually pair you with a current student, and you can basically shadow the student for a day. And usually you get to stay in the dorm, they'll usually just have you on the couch. And you can,
if you're lucky, you might be on the floor.
When I ran this program, we always told students to try to make sure that there was either a spare bed or a couch available, because occasionally students did end up in a sleeping bag on the floor. Not saying that will happen to you, but it just be prepared for it. But you get to stay in the dorm, you get to eat the food, you get to go to a class. That's the best way to really experience what it's like to be a student there. And you can do that usually as either a prospective student, so that's before you've applied, or as an admitted student. So once you've been admitted, you can then go and usually experience that program. So once everything is reopened and travel is possible again, I would really recommend trying out some of those programs if you have the opportunity.
Thanks, Micah. Yeah, I also used to run one of those programs when I worked at Colorado College. I loved it. I thought it was amazing. Students had a blast. Alex is shaking her head. She probably ran one too. So they're very, very fun programs. Highly recommend. in lieu of those programs, actually, right now for our current seniors or juniors, anybody who really wants to get to know these schools that you're thinking of applying early decision to and you want to know a little bit more, there's currently a lot of like fall, they call them like virtual programs, like fall virtual programs, not just the info session I was talking about earlier or the live, tour or whatever. But actually they kind of have a virtual fall visit day. And so if you, look at your favorite schools or things like that, and you say, I just want to get to know this school more, like, how do I do this all in one go? I've got 2 hours. I want to get to know this school. Almost every weekend for the next month and a half, there's going to be a couple of these programs. And so please Google your school, find the program, sign up for it. You can pop in and out however much you want, but it's going to be, I think, very useful for you. All right, I am going to pass it off to Alex. She is taking the next question. And so we've got someone who asked, what tips do we have on applying early decision as an undecided student?
I love this question so much, because I think there are so many students who come in and they're like, I'm confident, I know what I want to do. And then there are students who are like, I think I know what I want to do, but I don't know for sure that I'm ready to like lock it in and be an engineering major for the next 4 years, right? What if I actually get there and I hate it? And the reason I love this question is because I was the same way. I really thought I wanted to be an accountant. It's a very exciting career, I know. I just really like numbers and I thought it made sense. But I really loved UChicago and they didn't have an accounting major. And so, you got to get creative at some points and think about, okay, what do I like and what's applicable, right? I knew I really liked math. So I settled on a statistics major. But for students who are still in that similar position or somewhere in between, right, like of not knowing, I always encourage students to think about a liberal arts school. Liberal arts schools really are very fluid in what you're able to study. One of the things that ended up with me at UChicago is after a year and a half, I realized I didn't love statistics, and statistics didn't love me. And it was not it. And I remember I left the class crying, and that's okay. It happens. It's gonna happen to everyone at one time. And I was like, I need to change my major. And I proceeded to go through a process of trying to figure out what the right major was. I was a psych major for a few weeks. I was an anthro major for a few weeks. And then I finally landed on something called comparative human development, which was totally made up by UChicago and specific to them. But that's the beauty of having some freedom and not knowing what you want to do is, I actually ended up having a really great internship experience one summer, which made me realize I love working with people. I love working with kids. Why wouldn't I continue to do something that stuck with that? And because I had chosen a liberal arts school, there was a lot of freedom. It didn't take I literally filled out a piece of paper, my advisor signed it, and I was a comparative human development major, that easy. So I always encourage students, think about a liberal arts school. Know that when you're applying, if you have to apply to a specific program or to a specific school, it might be a little bit more challenging to move out of that major, right? For instance, if you're applying to Columbia Engineering School, it might be easy to change your engineering type major between industrial engineering and mechanical, but it might be actually a lot trickier to go from being an engineering student to a philosophy student, right? So just know what that process is like for the school. But I really encourage liberal arts schools. And even I will also add, for students who are interested remotely in STEM and think that liberal arts might be too academic or too focused on non-STEM issues, what we're actually seeing is a lot of students going into business and STEM from liberal arts schools, in part because they get a little bit of everything, right? You learn how to be a great communicator. You learn how to be in a classroom with people who think differently, right? Not every engineering student is in that class with you. You're going to have a philosophy major and a classics major and a history major, all talking about the same topics, and learning to have a conversation with people who think differently than you is so valuable. So no matter what you think you might be interested in, but you're still undecided, I really think liberal arts school is the way to go.
I very much concur with that. But I think everyone knows that about me. I went to a school called Carleton College. I didn't change my major. I thought I think I got halfway through and I was like, I love learning. I'm obsessed with learning. All I want to do is learn forever, which is probably true actually. And Alex is laughing. She's probably like, yeah, that tracks. But I I was a psychology major basically from day one. And I'm really glad I was. But what was amazing for me is because I actually applied undecided, by the way. I took my first psychology class and I was like, and I'm done. This is it. I love it so much. Like, I love brains and cognitive science and like all the psychopathology stuff. Like, I'm in love with it. But when I applied undecided, I think the reason I applied to a liberal arts school, because it was like really nerdy and I fell in love with it. And that's just like true. The other piece is I wasn't sure what I would want, right? Like, I really did apply undecided. And a lot of people, at least at, some very highfalutin schools, will say you have to have a major, you have to decide something. I mean, I actually disagree. I think if you are leaning in a certain way, then you can apply specifically to that school. However, liberal arts students in liberal arts schools are wildly useful to help you determine what you want to do moving forward. And if I had not, I think been at a liberal arts school, I don't think I would have ended up in education, because I loved psychology and I majored in it, but I was able to take so many classes in the world of education and like childhood education development and all of that. And now I'm here and I'm so happy I am. And so I just like also wanted to promote what it sets up for you career-wise moving forward. Like, it really helps you whittle down what you like. Micah, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add, I think that's one of the best things about going to college in the US is that you have this liberal arts system where you can study a whole bunch of different things. You don't have to apply into a specific program. Some schools you do, like, some schools will have a dedicated business school, engineering school, things like that. But almost every big university will have a school of arts and sciences is typically what they call it. And that's just the more general, it's just open. It has 50 different majors. And usually you don't have to decide until the end of your second year of study what you want to major in. It's totally fine to apply early decision as an undecided major. Some schools might ask you in their supplemental application, what major are you interested in? And if you don't have a specific thing, you can also just write about a general area. You could say, I'm really interested in social sciences, or I'm interested in the physical sciences, or I want to major in a language, and be more general than that. Very rarely is it ever binding. So if you say in the application, especially if you're applying to liberal arts school, I want to major in history, that doesn't matter once you get there. You can major in whatever you want. So it's not something to stress about too much.
Thanks, Micah. And Alex, thanks for taking the lead on answering that one. So we are nearing the end of this session. And I just wanted to check and see if anybody had additional questions. Please feel free to throw them in the Q&A. We've really loved hearing from you. We've loved hearing all of these questions and answering all of them live. And I would say your pre-submitted questions were like wildly helpful. Thank you so much for that as well. As we wait for a couple more questions to roll in, I think it would be helpful just to explain a little bit more about who we are and what we do here at LogicPrep. And so for those of you listening in, if you work with us already, thank you. We love working with you. We love working with your families. And for those who are thinking about maybe working with a college advisor, feel free to shoot us an email. I'm going to type the email in the chat box right now, contact@logicprep.com. And you can also shoot me an email directly. I'll put my own email in. I'm the director of college advising, and just let us know if you want to have a conversation. We always offer a consultation to families. So feel free to reach out at that point. And then moving forward, I think it's also helpful to know that we not only do college consulting, but we do test preparation, we do academic and school support. And as part of the college consulting process, we also work with students on their essays and like crafting that narrative and that thread that Alex was talking about earlier. So that's LogicPrep, and it looks like we've got another question. Okay. What or who does early decision admission prioritize? Micah, do you want to take a stab at this one? Putting you on the spot here. You can say no.
For the student desk question, are you talking about what colleges, what they're prioritizing in the process? Because in general, what most colleges will do is it varies from school to school. Schools will admit between 25 and 50% in some cases of their class in early decision. And so with schools, it's usually the biggest priority for them is about building sort of a good foundation for their class, but they're going to admit through the same institutional priorities as they would in any other part of the application cycle. So at some schools, it can be, they really want to make sure they have a student from 50 different countries or every part of the US. They want to make sure they have students that are athletes and also musicians, that sort of thing. So it can really vary from school to school, but in general, with early decision, it's usually the same as it is in other cycles.
Thank you so much. And we've got a couple more questions rolling in, so thank you everyone for submitting. So I think that this is an interesting one. What is the difference between what admission looks for in an early decision applicant versus a regular decision applicant? Alex?
Yeah, I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where a really strong why you want to go to that school essay is going to make a huge difference. I mean, I think in a regular decision and an early decision, both are different pools, right? A regular decision, you're typically applying and it's a larger pool of applicants. They've already filled a portion of their class. And so the spots are going to be, it's going to be a tougher application pool. And so you are still expected to show at that stage that this is a school you really want to be at. But the difference being that in early decision, yes, the applicant pool might be smaller, but it is a binding application. And so they are looking for students who are, again, excited to be there, but that they have more confidence in that you're not gonna say, hey, you know what? I actually don't love this school as much as I thought I did. And now I've been accepted early decision. I don't want to go here, and trying to figure out how to navigate that process of backing out of an early decision, which I never recommend to a family to be in the situation where they need to do that unless they really have to. Yeah, so it's interesting because they are looking for that commitment to the school. It's just a difference in what type of pool are you applying in, a smaller pool of people who really love the school or a larger pool of people who some people just said, hey, I'm going to shoot my shot, right? And so it's two different groupings.
Thanks, Alex. And then another question that I'm going to answer myself. This one says, if you're accepted through early decision, can the university reject your application at a later date? Is early decision also binding for the university? So this is like kind of a two-part question. Universities do not just rescind applications to rescind applications, right? Like if they offer you a spot at their school, we keep using UChicago. So like, if we're offering a spot at UChicago and it's early decision, they're not going to say, surprise, like we actually have a better applicant. Nope, we're not going to do this anymore. So the answer is no. Once they admit you, you are admitted, except for one specific circumstance. Micah, I know you want to take this one. Are you ready?
Yep.
Go.
So there's one circumstance where you can get your application rescinded, your offer of admission rescinded. And this is essentially if you completely fail every class senior year. So
if you fail maybe more than one, like I feel like you have to fail at least one. It doesn't have to be all of them.
Well, I'll give you exact examples. So for 5 years when I worked in admissions, I checked the final transcript for all 660 incoming freshmen. So if you're applying early decision, you are submitting your application late October, early November. You will submit to colleges the grades that you have completed, usually just the first quarter of your senior year. And when you get admitted early decision, there's usually a line in your admit letter that will say, we are admitting you under the condition that you will finish the year at the same level of academic quality that you were admitted at. And so I was the person who in the summer would go through all 600 transcripts and make sure that everybody graduated in that same level of academic excellence. And where I worked, the rule was you got flagged if you had 3 or more C's or 1 D. Or anything worse than that. You would get a letter from us basically saying we were disappointed and we would like you to explain what happened. In the 7 years I worked there, we only ever rescinded admission for 1 student. And that was a student who did fail almost every single class senior year after being admitted.
And we did rescind, we have rescinded admission in the admission offices I've worked at as well. And so it's uncommon, but again, as Micah said, like maintain your level of grades, please, once you get accepted. That's the only reason they would rescind, unless something else like really crazy negative happens. And that did happen once to us as well. And so we had someone who had a really negative, I don't know, school disciplinary situation. I will call it like an honor code violation, and that one we rescinded as well. So, all right.
Can I add one more
Yes.
situation, which, and this is important for early decision applicants, and that is there have been occasions where if a school finds out that you applied early decision to multiple schools, or you applied early decision to one school and restrictive early action to another, you broke the agreement that you signed by applying, they actually do have every right to rescind your application. Now, they're going to have some more conversations before hopefully they do that with you, but this is part of why we stress to students the importance of a binding agreement, is that it doesn't just reflect on you, it reflects on your school community as well, right? If somebody were to, and I think Micah mentioned this earlier, right back out of that, it reflects not just on you, but your school too. So just make sure you know.
Yeah, thank you. All right, next question. So would we say that early decisions admissions are less or more strict with SAT, ACT, and grades and extracurriculars? I think the blanket answer here is they are slightly more lenient in the early decision pool. Do you agree, Mike and Alex?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's just the answer. Yes, they are slightly more lenient in the early decision pool with SAT, ACT, and then grades. I actually think extracurriculars matter in both pools. I mean, they all matter in all pools, but extracurriculars, I don't think really change from the ED pool to the EA pool. So, all right. Thank you for asking that question. Next question is, does this also happen with IB if the predicted grades are overestimating your actual grades? Another good question, Alex. Micah's shaking his head. Micah, do you want to start? And then Alex, do you want to chime in? And then we have time for one more question, by the way. So please get your questions in.
My answer is just no, not really. I wouldn't worry too much if there's a discrepancy between the predicted and the actual. I never saw that cause a student any problems.
That's Alex? Really nice of you, Micah. I think we've seen that on the other end too. And I think, again, this is totally applicable to what schools you're looking at, right? At a highly selective school where, U Chicago would have been considered an IB plus. So in my experience, a student whose predicted score was above a 40 and then comes below a 40 at some point can be a challenge. It could be a challenge, and you might come in with a letter similar to what Micah said, which is, we're really disappointed to see how things turned out for you, like what happened, and a conversation with the deans in terms of like academic support for when you get there, right? It's determining whether or not you struggled or you had senioritis. and what the difference was and how can we support you to come in. I would say it was pretty rare, but just being aware that, just because you got into a school, that doesn't mean that your year is done, right? Like complete the year just as strong as you started the school year.
And then, so someone asked another question here. So I'm going to ask this one to Micah. So when colleges say they are test optional, are they really test optional?
Yes. Short answer, yes. Long answer, what we would recommend for every student is you want to take the test anyway, no matter what. Every school has a range, and this is publicly available information of what the range of students that they admit, what that SAT range is. And so even if the school is test optional, but if your scores are in that middle 50 of the range or in the top 25% as well, it's usually to your advantage to submit them. If they're not, we would recommend you don't do it. But schools wouldn't offer a test optional policy if they didn't, mean it, essentially.
Thanks, Micah. So it's kind of like yes, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. It's kind of where we're at. All right, and I think our last two questions, one came in on the main chat and one came in the Q&A. So the Q&A question is, do colleges care about how many SAT or ACT tests you have taken? I generally say no. There are a couple schools that don't offer super scoring. And so if that is the case, that you will need to submit just your highest score. But for those who super score, which means you can submit, 5 ACTs or 3 SATs, and they will select the best section score of each part of your SAT or ACT and kind of add that all up, and that will be your super score. Those colleges really, it shouldn't matter to them. They say they don't care. And I think in that capacity, I actually probably believe them. I don't think they care how many you've taken, as long as you eventually get the scores that are in that top 25% or sometimes 50%, as Mike was talking about.
And I could just very quickly add, where I worked, the way our system was designed, all that the person reading your application saw was your top scores. So the person who is actually reviewing your application wouldn't even know if you took it 1 time or 10.
Thanks,
That
Micah.
does vary by school, right? Some schools are like that,
Yes,
Micah,
absolutely.
and some schools will see all of them. So it's just good to know.
And then we also have a main question here. I think this one is relatively specific. Do universities in the United States encourage submitting IGCSE scores as well as IB? Alex, any thoughts on that, or Micah?
Sure. Can you actually define IGCSE for everyone on the call, just in case there are folks out there who aren't familiar?
Really, you know what? I actually just Googled it because I don't know how to define it outside of IGCSE. It's the Cambridge Results Statistics. Micah, you're making an ah sound, so you probably know what this is, but I think here's what it says: International General Certificate of Secondary Education. And my general comment to this is, if you have the scores, yes, I would recommend you submit them. Micah, do you agree with that?
Yes. This is the A levels, right? I believe is how these are usually.
Yeah, A like A through G. Yes.
Yeah, A through G levels. If you have them, you can submit them. From my own experience, I will tell you most admissions officers in the US are not going to know what it is and will probably end up Googling it. But if you have it, it certainly won't hurt.
I would say, again, like if you have scores, especially if they're good scores, I would say submit them. It definitely can't hurt. All right. I think we have almost perfectly hit the hour mark. So thank you everyone so much for being here. I think I'm going to close down this webinar in about 30 seconds. So I just want to say thank you again. I'm Carrie. We've got Micah. We have Alex here. We have loved talking to you today. We're really, really grateful. And thank you for the thank you on the side. I just saw the chat. Please email me. Please email LogicPrep if you have any questions. I can always forward questions to Alex and Micah as well. So we're really excited to talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great night.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.